I'm here to talk about the breakdown in human communication and what can be done to fix it. My name is Hugh Bowen, and for me, this is a very personal thing. For a long time, like 15 or 20 years, I've had a growing feeling that as a culture, we are less and less connected with each other, with much less face-to-face time and much more screen time relating to other people. TV has, of course, been a big driver in that, and add on to that, we're doing 100 emails a day, checking Facebook, and in the evening, settling in for a nice time with Netflix. For many of us, it seems it's more important to connect with celebrities rather than the real people around us, and I think all this is putting us in a very bad place. Connecting or not connecting with other people is the central thing I have to talk about today, but a major corollary to this is how we're connected to a higher power, to God, I would say, but think of that in whatever term works for you, power for good in the universe, and how we are connected to the quiet inner place within us. And I think in all three of these, we are really falling down. We are more alone and less connected to each other than we've been in more than 70 years. And there's a great deal of solid sociological evidence for that. How did this happen? It's been a long time coming, but now, of course, we watch TV 4 hours a day for the typical American, which I think is terribly isolating. You're just watching this box. There was this funny research where people voluntarily gave up TV entirely for a while, and this one woman said, in the evening, all there is to do is talk to Fred. So we've cocooned in the suburbs. And suburban houses are wonderful, and my parents raised me in the suburbs, and I'm very thankful for the wonderful life they provided. But there was a vitality and connection to other people in the life of the front stoop in the inner city, in the life of the front porch in small towns, which has faded away. And the World War II generation, which was so connected with each other because of the trust they had is so amazing, considering the challenges they had. They are slipping from the scene. I take these factors all from the book Bowling Alone by the great sociologist Robert Putnam. And now, of course, you add on to the top of that technology and media obsession. Now, the scariest thing to me for this, if you remember, I remember 10 or 15 years ago, the first time in a science fiction movie or a book where I came across the concept of, you're sitting in a chair and you're surrounded by holograms, and you might see a wonderful video of your trip or a trip, vacation trip to Mexico, and you never leave the chair. So there's no real life. You're just jacked into the net. And that, when I first heard it, sounded like the weirdest, most outlandish thing. And yet now, when I think about how we live, I think we're kind of verging on that. The Gantner Group projected that in developed countries by 2010 we would spend 10 times as much time relating to people on screens as we do in person. And I think that's about what's happened. Now, that's not really the scariest thing. In the most drastic sense, what would happen to us long term if we seriously reduced our ability to love and relate to each other? Neural pathways that control this in our mind, really it's a matter of use them or lose them. They're developed in childhood mainly, though there's some debate about how late this can go. Maybe they can continue to be developed into your 20s. But we know that in a loving, empathetic home, children develop neural pathways that give them the ability to love and be warm with other people. Now think about a sociopath. If you've got their mind wired up so you're checking their pathways. If you show them a picture of a person in great pain or tremendous sadness, they feel nothing. And those neural pathways, if you're checking, are dead silent. Is it possible that over time we could lose our ability to love? And we really are, of course, as a species. It's been critical to us, critical to our survival, this ability to connect with other people. One early example from prehistoric time, if I was out hunting with a group of men and a fellow over here saw or sensed a saber-toothed tiger coming on us to eat us, the amount of time it would take me to sense his fear is in the milliseconds. It's incredibly fast. So we really are made to be connected. This started for me with a feeling that we were spending too much time with technology and losing touch with other people in the 90s, and TV was the main culprit. And I remember when I was young, there was a theoretical offer made to people. If you were given $1 million, would you give up TV forever? And most people in the America of the day said no. Now that was before I was aware of all the historical trends, but maybe I was so aware of this also because I've spent my life working in media and technology in the video game industry. So I'm kind of in this up to my neck. About 15 years ago, it was GamePro, a video game magazine, that had a contest, who's the most beautiful woman in the world? And the winner was the character in the Tomb Raider game, based on Angelina Jolie. But it wasn't the real woman. It wasn't Angelina Jolie who won. It was the pixelized computer graphic version of her in the game that won. When I heard that, I thought, oh my, that's a sad state of affairs. Then after 2000, I found myself talking faster and interrupting more, and I found a lot of my friends and family doing the same thing. I had a fear I was becoming like a fox talking head like Chris Matthews, who interrupts constantly, and I really like Chris Matthews. But actually, I would say the most extreme example of this is those television talk show panels, quote unquote, where 5 people all talk at once, often howling at the top of their lungs, getting angrier as they go along. There is no real communication happening there. When I did my own study, my own nationwide online survey, I had a feeling that if I asked people, are people talking faster and interrupting more, that they would say yes, and that's what happened. About half did say yes, and most of the rest said no change, so there was a clear national trajectory in how we communicate in talking faster and interrupting more. And to me, this is really very basic and obvious. The way that we talk with each other has to do with how we communicate, how we relate to each other, and ultimately, how we love and connect with each other. My study was with 560 people in the fall of 2009. And here are the actual numbers. 42% think others are talking faster compared to recent years. 54% no change. 49% feel we are interrupting more in conversation compared to recent years. Again, most of the rest see no change. When I asked people directly how they feel about the connection of people in our society as a whole, 53% said it's kind of weak or disturbingly so. So people recognize this is a problem. Technology came in for a real pounding. A lot of people see folks going to live in the online world, not the real world. One person said, we're sitting in a restaurant, 2 people, obviously on a date, sitting across from each other, each of them texting, laughing, texting to someone else. As the person in the survey said, why aren't they just looking each other in the eye the way normal people would? People will communicate via text or instant message when they really should be doing it in person, like when you're breaking up with someone, and of course you just defriend them from Facebook and you're done, or even when firing someone. I remember when I was young, someone saying, if you ever notice when you're at a party, and maybe you don't know that person super well, but you're basically just waiting for them to finish talking, you're thinking of what you're going to say, and you just can't wait to get in your own point. And I think that's kind of how our entire culture is starting to operate. I think it has to do with fear. Our world is so out of control, we want to at least be able to say the thing that we have in mind. Now, corollary of this is the flaming anger of a lot of online communication. We all say things harsher in emails than we would say in person. I think it's because the other person isn't in front of us. That's just it. And the political debate in this country is pretty useless, the national political debate. Maybe even the incredible religious extremism that swept the globe in all the major faiths, Christian, Muslim, and Judaic, is a reflection of this. It's like with the internet, as people, as religions, we are so swamped over with so much information, everybody else's point of view, we just feel this drastic need to get out what we think, and it's taking us to some pretty extreme forms of communication. Also, in my study, 93% said time is speeding up. So if we're talking faster, interrupting more, and time is speeding up, where is all this taking us? I think people clearly feel things are somewhat out of balance. So how bad could this get? I think pretty bad. A friend was on the phone with me and they needed to get off quickly. And I'm embarrassed to say this, but I said, later, and slammed down the phone. I think I wanted to create the illusion that I was still in control of the phone call. A few days later, another friend did the same thing to me. Someone has told me about what they call the new millennium hang-up, where two people are talking on the phone and they are nearing the end of the call, but neither one has said goodbye. One will just hang up. As one person in my survey said, it's like a contest out there. Who can be the rudest? Now I have some poetry for you, and I'm clearly not a poet, so I'm going to have to ask your forbearance with this. But I wrote it about 8 years ago. I call it The Flicker of the Candle, and it will show you my frame of mind on this topic. Out of the cover of darkness rode the soldiers of light, but are they enough? The quiet voice of the 19th century, a century filled with pure sunlight falling on a quiet English lane, a time of broad, sunlit uplands. This quiet voice was stilled. The hand of God was taken from us, or maybe we dropped it as we danced in all our primal anger. The dulcet tones of Monet and the glorious great baggy monsters, as Henry James called the 19th century novel, oh God, I love those, gave way to 1914. 1914, death in the trenches, a mechanized and mindless death, a chorus of shells wailing overhead, as the poet Rupert Brooke wrote, ushered in the new century. A great darkness fell upon the land, but not the fertile darkness of soil where seeds sleep. Rather, a black night filled with the bursting of cannon, rattle of machine guns, the cut of barbed wire stopping the forlorn platoon. Blindly we marched forward, desperately seeking the dawn. The touch of the human hand and the flicker of the candle gave way to the softly glowing phosphors of our computer screen. But they don't hug us back. They don't even know we're here. Television became our only companion as we sit in an empty room. But I do have hope. I'm convinced we'll find a way out of this. But in the meantime, where we are now, according to the U.S. Census, the thing Americans do more than any other, although I don't think they were counting sleep, is to consume media. The census predicts we will spend half our lives with the media, TV, the internet, radio or music, and reading. 4 hours a day, as I said, with the television. 2/3 of all Americans keep the TV running during most meals. So actually, media is the thing we do more than anything else. It is the dominant thing about us. I think TV is clearly anesthetizing. I personally find when I don't watch TV in the evening, I wake up more refreshed in the morning, although I still watch plenty. My wife and I love to watch American Idol. So the young are more involved with technology than those older. The average American teen sends 3,339 texts per month, or 6 every hour that they're awake. And this was not a lightweight study. It was from Nielsen with 60,000 mobile subscribers from the spring of 2010. So for teenagers, texting is really becoming the more dominant form of communication versus speaking to someone. And I do something similar. I can't stop myself from checking my email when I see it. And I have an automatic thing which checks it every 10 minutes or so. I think the charge we get from email, instant messaging, texting, is that we think, somebody's trying to reach out to us. Hey, there might be something really neat in that next communication. So yes, it is a human connection, but it's a shallow one. Although I am having some success in looking at my email, a little bit less. So why would it matter if we're living on emails and instant messaging? According to communication experts, 80% of communication is body language, 10% is the tone of your voice, and 10% is the words themselves. So I don't think, so if this is true, we're subsisting on 10% of the potential human communication. And I don't think the quantity of texts can make up for it. Another way to put this, if you just got a text saying we're happy, or you saw a picture of a couple, or you're with them in person, that you knew that were hugging each other with great happiness. Think of the difference. Or if you just read a text that says, listen up, or something, hey, listen up, in person. Huge difference. Statistically, what's our situation? 1 in 4 Americans lives alone, according to the U.S. Census, and that, to me, sounds terribly lonely. The attention span of kids has been cut in half the last dozen years, teachers tell me. This is for late grade school and middle schoolers. Used to be the teachers could carry a topic for 24 minutes before they just had to switch or they were going to lose the kids. Now it's down to 12 minutes. And this is not a surprise if you think of all the fast-cut videos we see in movies and on the web. It's what we're getting used to. Teachers say that kids can't concentrate. Now, obviously, to me, the ability to concentrate on a task is one of the things that's required to get things done. Now, where is this going? Where will we be in another dozen years? Kids need a new topic every 6 minutes? Some examples of this speeding up thing. Think about the movies. In the 70s and 80s, your typical movie would take 20 or 25 minutes to introduce the characters, lay out the story, build things up before your first dramatic event. And these days, if somebody doesn't fall off a building or have a terrible car crash within the first 2 minutes, people just stop watching. And people with their BlackBerry will sleep with it, put it on their bedside. And if it beeps because a message has come in during the night, they will get up and check it. That is just crazy, and that's why they call it a crackberry. So how much information can we take? The Sunday New York Times, a single one, has more new information in it than a typical person in the 18th century got in their entire life. It's like a gushing fire hose, truly is. Now, why do we love media so much? As I understand it, anthropologically, the way we're set up, if we see something and we hear something, we think it's real. So media is so engaging because it's just about like real life. Except, of course, it's not. As I said, not enough time with other folks is the main issue I see here, but it's also not enough time with ourselves, the quiet time where you can check your inner compass. Not enough contemplative time to connect to, however you want to put it, God, Great Spirit, Allah, the quiet of the universe. Besides, why connect with yourself when you can always listen to another iTunes song? Okay, enough anecdotal stuff. To confirm this general sense of things that I had, I wanted to check what scholars and other social observers had to say. The best book on the topic by a mile, Bowling Alone, as I said before, by the great sociologist Robert Putnam. Robert Putnam rigorously examines our social connectedness behavior in America since 1940. He looks at how we connect or don't connect, and almost all the trends say the same thing. He looks at our social organizations, what we do at church, in our unions, how we relate to our kids, the personal connection and involvement we have with political groups, how much we talk over the back fence, and all of these point to the same thing. There is a steady decline in what Putnam calls social capital. Now, social capital for Putnam is essentially trust between people who are really connected. It's not just about feel-good stuff. This trust enabled people to work together in groups to do extraordinary things like bonding together and winning the Second World War. As I said, it means you feel so bonded that you don't need to continually consider if the other person will let you down. You don't need to do 10 background checks. You don't need to have a lawyer check every inch of every step you take. It means all business arrangements, family and personal arrangements all go smoother, easier, and better. It's key to a civilized society. Just think about it. If there was no trust, where would we be? And I'm afraid our stores of trust have declined dramatically the last 70 years. Now, by the late 20th century, we knew we had a problem. In 1992, 3/4 of the U.S. workforce said, quote, that the breakdown of the community and selfishness were serious or extremely serious problems in America. Many Americans felt we were becoming less trustworthy, feeling that our society was focused more on the individual than the community. And America has always been the land of rugged individualism. And that's a good thing, but we're taking it to such an extreme, an isolating extreme these days. Sometimes it seems to me that in this media culture, it's more important that our teeth are bright and our abs are flat than that we have a good connection with other people. Our way of being has been changing. In 1976, a study from the University of Michigan looked back 2 decades and found that informal socializing with friends and relatives declined by about 10%. Organizational memberships fell by 16%. And church attendance declined by 20%. And that these declines included unions, church groups, fraternal and veterans organizations, civics groups such as PTA, youth groups, charities, etc. And these trends would only deepen during the final 2 decades of the 20th century. One of the exceptions being the activist church. And about that, in fact, church involvement in general, is the trait most closely associated with other forms of civic involvement like voting, involvement in community projects, talking with your neighbors. I mean, I'm incredibly involved with my church that I've been going to the last 22 years. From my home office, 75 yards away, I can see the steeple of the church. I'm on committees, I'm in small groups. I can remember which were tough economic times for me in 2009. I lost 20 pounds, which for me was a lot of weight. And friends at church would ask how I was doing. I can remember the end of my belt would be hanging out. I remember the friend coming up and just tugging on it. And it was his way of saying, hey, I know you're skinny. I know you've lost that weight. You know, I'm with you. And, get eaten and things are going to come back for you. So, of course, my family was the critical thing. But my church family was incredibly important also. They even had a job hunters group. Potluck, anyone? I think of potlucks, and I love potlucks. I think of potlucks as a general metaphor for socializing. Apparently not much potlucks these days. From the mid to the late 1970s, people entertained at home 14 to 15 times a year, which fell in half by the 1990s. How about a simple social evening with friends or people from the neighborhood? Again, was down by a third from 1974 to 1998. As I said, I love potlucks, and being a Methodist, I like to think of heaven as one big Methodist potluck. You know, we've got the other potlucks all around us. I'm afraid our potluckness is in serious decline. So if we're not connecting, what are we doing? Well, we moved to the suburbs, took up commuting, and turned on the TV. It is kind of isolated, as I was saying, in the suburbs. The historian Kenneth T. Jackson has a wonderful description, quote, with increased use of automobiles, the life of the sidewalk and the front yard has largely disappeared. There are few places as desolate and lonely as a suburban street on a hot afternoon. And it definitely brings back lonely memories for me, hot summer afternoon in the suburbs, walking by the tennis courts, no one to play with. Also, commuting, we now average 72 minutes per day in the car, which is more than twice as much time as the average parent spends with their child. But, of course, we've got email and instant messages, so aren't we okay? Now, what about family structure? And it has changed very significantly. The incidence of one-person households has more than doubled since 1950, which sounds very lonely to me in many cases, I think. 1/3 of all families are single-parent households, and we may be headed towards Europe where it's half of all families. Not that a single parent can't do a fine, even a wonderful job raising their children. I just think more resources, 2 loving parents is a better way to have it when you can. We're so much less likely to be married in general. 1974, 74% of all adults were married in the U.S., but it was only 56% in 1998. So there's been a major sea change in how we live. Now, last, the family structure is a big topic these days, and I think people are missing the main point. People talk about gays being such a threat to the nuclear family, and I think, in fact, the nuclear family has imploded all on its own due to a lot of general trends in society, as I've been discussing. It's my opinion that a gay-loving family can be just as loving as anyone else, and what we need to do is concentrate on being loving in our own families rather than worrying about someone else. A huge and disturbing factor is the celebrity culture. The book Fame Junkies asked middle schoolers what they'd most like to be given 5 choices. 9.5% said the chief of a major company like General Motors. 9.8% a Navy SEAL. 13.6% a U.S. Senator. 23.7% president of a great university like Harvard or Yale. But then a whopping 43.4% the personal assistant to a very famous singer or movie star. Not the actual star, just the overpaid, subservient, 24/7, do-it-all gopher assistant to the star. In other words, just to be near the star means everything. We watch so much media, we think the media world is the world we want to be in at all costs. The real world, where we are with our friends and family, well, it's not nearly as important. For many people, especially young people, that's the case, and I think that's not good. Now, you've probably heard these statistics before, but they bear repeating. According to the Journal of the American Medical Association, the typical kid will have seen 40,000 murders and 200,000 other acts of violence on television by the time they're 18. So celebrity and media have become our reality, and in many ways, it's nasty. Let's check our health. From 1950 to 1995, suicide rates for 15 to 19-year-olds quadrupled. Suicide rates for 20 to 24-year-olds nearly tripled. Now it's estimated 10% of Americans suffer from major depression. Medical evidence strongly suggests that social isolation weakens our immune system and shortens life. And actually, statistically, social connectedness is just as important a factor in your overall health as smoking. So yes, if you're comparing seriously ill cancer or heart patients, those who are socially connected fared far, far better. John, in my church, he was dying in the hospital. A wonderful man. He'd spent his life working for the Boy Scouts. He'd raised money for a children's center at our church. And he and I would go for rides in my convertible BMW and talk things over. And he was always willing to listen to me. Many of us from the church were there at the hospital for his last day. And when I went in to talk with him, we talked about him for a while, like a minute or two. And then he started asking how I was doing. Now remember, the guy is dying. So I launched into my troubles, and he was very supportive and giving me ideas about work and other things. My point is that this kind of guy, who is given of himself and is so loved by other people, does much better, obviously, when facing illness or even death. How's the political dialogue here? I think we all know the answer to that. Between 1974 and 1998, when voters were asked how involved they were in current events, interest had fallen by 20%. Roper surveys have found public participation, as shown in most measures, signing petitions, writing Congress, attending a political rally, etc., declined by 34% from 1973 to 1994. More distressing, quote, in 1973, most Americans engaged in at least one of these forms of civic involvement every year, but by 1991, most did not engage in any. And writing a check for a political cause, which many of us do, of course, is not the same as personally going and working with other people. My national study also showed that people really feel the political debate is completely polarized. In many cases, it's just combative and doesn't contribute in any real way to our well-being. In my study, 67% said that politicians in Washington really hardly listen to each other. It's more like they're just trading attacks. Now, I would have thought, and maybe you too would have thought, that it's time and money pressures that have separated us from each other. Putnam says no, and he's based on a tremendous depth of research. His view is that this separation from each other can be attributed 10% to time and money pressures, but another 10% to moving to the suburbs, 25% to the rise of electronic entertainment, and 50% to the end of the World War II generation. Now, there are countervailing trends. Increase in political volunteering, the Obama effect, grassroots evangelical conservatives very involved in their local communities, and small groups, self-help, small support groups. Those are greatly on the rise, a very good thing, I think. Things like AA, those take place half in churches. One of the things that's really encouraging to me is the way Putnam compares the end of the 19th century with the end of the 20th century. And he says, quote, America in the last quarter of the 19th century suffered from classic symptoms of a social capital deficit, like now. Crime waves, degradation in the cities, inadequate education, a widening gap between rich and poor, a saturnalia of political corruption, also mistrust of immigrants, and a great concentration of wealth in the hands of the few. Both these periods, let's start with the economy, were really periods of extreme change. At the end of the 19th century, it was industrialization, people moving to factories in the cities. At the end of the 20th century, it's computerization and globalization. Now, thinking about the 19th century for a minute, imagine going from the farm, where, in the wonderful phrase from the literature, nothing moved faster than the pace of a walking horse. And you knew everyone, and everyone knew you. I mean, you were completely connected. And then you go to a city where you work 12 hours a day in a dangerous factory. And by the way, your 10-year-old son is working in there too, and you know no one. The social fabric was completely shredded. That situation actually sounds much worse to me now than what we're facing. In both periods, it was sort of a Wild West economy where, due to the tremendous rate of change, a few people did extremely well, like the robber barons at the end of the 19th century, the computer barons at the end of the 20th, and the many declined, many severely. There was a great concentration of wealth. At the end of the 19th century, the top 1% had half of all the wealth in the country, and it is exactly the same today. And if you think about all the factors things which defined that time, they're very much like our period, the end of the 20th century. Decline in social capital, concern about crime, inadequate education, huge gap between rich and poor, a lot of political corruption. A lot of people feel there's been a lot of political corruption in the last 20 years. And also distrust of immigrants. When life is incredibly challenging, something new coming in makes people feel threatened. And then and now, there's significant parts of our population who are very suspicious of immigrants. So what happened at the end of the 20th century? Well, the American people responded. Unions grew up. There was redistribution of wealth due to the progressive movement. People crammed into the cities, found a way to reweave the social fabric. They built up and increased the Italian American Club, the PTA, the Big Brother programs, the League of Women Voters, Boy Scouts, and more. We found ways to reconnect. And the fact that they did gives me a lot of faith that we will too. So what's to become of us? I was talking with a friend, another video game researcher. We were both at a trade show in San Francisco having lunch. So I was going on and on about this, and he was very engaged in listening. About partway through, he says, "So we're screwed?" And I would say, no, we're going to fix this. My main sense of hope is that we are meant to connect with one another, so we will. It's in us. And aside from this example compared to the 19th century, I also have a feeling that technology may be able to help. Facebook, there's 500 million people on it. I think a couple 100 million on the next largest social network. So there's like 1 billion people. What is that? 1 out of every 8 in the planet are on a social network. So people are reaching out. They're trying to connect. And I personally don't think playing the game Farmville and just fertilizing somebody else's farm online is a meaningful, intimate, personal connection. I think it would have to be different than it is now. But I think there may be something happening there. We were crammed in the cities. Now we're crammed together on the internet. We're going to find a way to make that meaningful. Next, the number one thing that brings people together is hard times. And World War II is a superb example of that. And, we have that now. 2008, in the fall, many economists feel we were this close to a worldwide economic collapse. Still have terrible unemployment in many areas of the globe. I, in trying to rebuild my small business in 2009, was networking like a crazy man, just connecting and reaching out to every person I ever knew who might have something to do with my business. And I find a lot of other people are doing the same thing, and I find people are more willing to talk to me. And it's because they think, well, 2 months from now, I might need a connection. So we are reaching out. And as someone said, humans are the most adaptable of species. So we can change how we act. Also, I can't believe God, or substitute your own word, means for us to just slip into darkness. I've wrestled with this myself. I've found ways to do better. And I think there's lots of things we can do. I see little green shoots. Well, one anyway. I heard the top 5 to 10% income earners in the United States the last 2 years are now eating dinner at home twice as often. And I don't think it's just to save money. I think they sense the economic rhinoceros is smashing through the barrier, the fence at the edge of the village. So people are getting together closer with their families and bonding. And I think that's a good thing. So my suggestions. Well, what I'm doing here is trying to raise the issue. I think if you're aware of a problem, that's the first step towards doing anything about it. And there's lots of things to try. You could try to connect more with your friends and family. Try to really listen to the people around you. I find when I do that, they listen to me more. Try to slow down as much as you're able. In your work group, and I think a lot of this is going to have to happen in groups. It's not going to be done one by one. But in your work group, maybe agree no emails after 8 o'clock at night. And I realize this might be impossible in many companies where the CEO, 10 o'clock, he sends an email. He wants an answer now. On vacation, don't check your email 5 times or 25 times a day. Once in a while, just turn off the TV in the evening. For me, I try to put a lot of time into my friends and family, and I was quite a workaholic when I was younger. For me, prayer and meditation in my church family have been huge. I've read the Bible through 7 times. I meditate every day, and I have a lot of close friends at my church. Even when I'm going nuts with work, if I can just take 15 minutes for a quiet walk down the lane, it really helps. So those are my suggestions. I wish you good luck out there, and take care.